This is Paul. Got this article from Tyler from our local meetup and read it and immediately saw the relevance he was discussing. He's part of a little subgroup that we have that sort of keeps an eye on the Discord server to try and keep it healthy and do a little bit of trimming every now and then to try to keep the garden a healthy place. And as I read through this, I think you'll immediately see the relevance to it, and I'll give commentary as I read. It's entitled Geeks, MOPs and Sociopaths and the Subculture Evolution on a website, Meaningness, which I hadn't seen anything of, but you might see more of it. And it'll be interesting for me to watch and listen to your responses to this. Subcultures are dead. I plan to write a full obituary soon. Who wrote this article? I'm not sure. What's interesting about this piece, I don't have a name for it yet, but it's the sort of piece that it's kind of like the MOOCs and Geeks piece where you see a very large pattern. It helps expose a very large pattern. You immediately recognize the pattern. Language in it gets a little bit morphed and shaped from the way language has been used before. And so you just sort of have to go with it and continue to adjust your terms. And they have a little glossary where you can look up their particular ideas behind some of the words. And so it is a little hard to keep up, but as you go through it, it becomes pretty clear and really rather fascinating. Subcultures are dead. I plan to write a full obituary. Now I look at my little image down below and I think, well, maybe I should rearrange and put the thing on the other side. Hang on. There, that's me on the other side. And some of you always ask, well, what software do you use? What equipment do you use to make your little videos? And right now I'm using OBS. OBS is quite a bit more flexible than some of the other things I was using. It's free. It works quite well. We use vMix at church for some other things, but I haven't put vMix on this computer, and OBS is working okay for now. Back to the topic. Subcultures are dead. I plan to write a full obituary soon. Subcultures were the main creative cultural force from roughly 1975 to 2000 when they stopped working. Why? And of course, I knew that word subculture before 1975. What do you mean there weren't subcultures before then? And again, you have to sort of go into their glossary of terms to understand exactly what they mean by all these words. And the link for the article will be below, and go ahead and dig in, and I'll enjoy hearing your responses to it. One reason among several is that as soon as subcultures start really getting really interesting, they get invaded by muggles. Of course, we're leveraging some Harry Potter terminology there, muggles, who ruin them. Subcultures have a predictable life cycle in which popularity causes death. Eventually, around 2000, everyone understood this and gave up hoping some subculture could somehow escape this dynamic. Now, part of what's interesting to me about this article is not just the dynamic and the pattern that they lay out quite nicely, but the implicit goal behind it, which is a deeply religious goal. It's in some sense the quest for everything. And the quest for eternal life, the quest for escape from the cycles of fruitless conversation and flailing about. You can read very brief previews of my analysis of subculture dynamics in this table or in this page. And again, I'll link this below so you can go ahead and click on those. The muggles who invade and ruin subcultures come in two distinct flavors, MOPs and Sociopaths, making very different roles. This is the insight. This insight was influenced by Venkash Rao's Gervais principle, which I haven't read but plan to read now. He, of course, is the guy who did the MOOCs and Knights piece. An analysis of workplace dynamics. Rao's theory is hideous, insightful. Is hideous, insightful nihilism. I recommend it. And what's nice about this page, this blog, is that you can mouse over something and it gives you a little thing. Rao postulates three groups in any organization: the clueless, the losers, and the sociopaths. The clueless mistakenly believe that the organization is actually supposed to do whatever it pretends to be for. Selling widgets, saving endangered herons, or educating school children, for example. That now, what we're seeing here, to a degree, I haven't played on it for a while, but is this is Theories of the 20th Century. Daniel Bonavac has those lectures on his channel, which he's not doing anymore. He probably was stopped from teaching that class. But it was a good class because he kept talking about these two-level theories. And so they're simply assuming a lot of two-leveledness here, that, well, we're here to educate school children, but really this is a political indoctrination into such and such. We're here to turn people into fully committed followers of Jesus Christ, but what this is really about is social domination and being tyrannical against dim-witted, simplistic people who believe in fairy tales and religion and whatnot. I mean, it's all these two-level theories that we've seen a lot of over the last couple of centuries. They're dedicated to this mission and work hard and creatively to further it. The losers have a job because they need a paycheck. Their motivation is to make work reasonably pleasant in exchange for minimal effort. The sociopaths recognize the reality that the organization is just the setting for a power game played amongst themselves. The sociopaths are people who actually believe in postmodernity and say, aha, nihilism, nothing's worth anything, so I might as well... Eric Weinstein and Brett Weinstein would call these people rent seekers. So those are the sociopaths in this terminology. Nobody really cares about the widgets, the herons, or other people's children. The losers also understand this, but they don't have what it takes to play the game. In subcultures, geeks are, and we'll get into geeks in a little bit, and it's a little bit from Bern Power's piece. So Bern, if you're listening to this, I'm sure you'll have ideas for this, and you can weigh in the comment section. Geeks are roughly parallel to the losers understand this but don't have what it takes to play the game. In subcultures, geeks are roughly parallel to the clueless. They are passionate about whatever the subculture is supposedly about. MOPs substitute for losers. They show up in a reasonable, pleasant time for exchange for minimum effort. Sociopaths are the sociopaths. The detailed dynamics are rather different, though. For example, the Gervais principle says that organizations begin with sociopaths and end up with mostly clueless, wherever subcultures begin with geeks and end up with mostly MOPs. Okay, well, let's keep reading. And the definitions of some of this stuff will be clear as we go. Before there's a subculture, there is a scene. A scene is a small group of creators who invent an exciting new thing. A musical genre, a religious sect, a film animation technique, a political theory. And we could say, for the benefit of this channel, let's call the Jordan Peterson wave a scene, okay? And we could even imagine the little frothy buzz that a tiny group of people have around my channel. We might call this a scene, or it might be a new movie that just opened, or a play on Broadway, or a new church that opened down the road, or some new discovery that has happened that somehow all of our little electrons get excited. So a scene. Riffing off each other, they produce examples and variants and share them for mutual enjoyment, generating positive energy. The new scene draws fanatics. Fanatics don't create, but they contribute energy, time, money, adulation, organization, analysis to support the creators. Creators and fanatics are both geeks. Okay, what do you mean by geek? Because I can't say that word now, having listened to how much Burn Power and not have to actually connect it with a whole bunch of knowledge and history. I'm using geeks here to mean someone fascinated by the details of a subject most people don't care about. There's another sense of geek, meaning the sort of person you'd expect to find at a science fiction convention. There's significant overlap, but in the first sense, there are gardening geeks and golfing geeks, and most probably aren't geeks in the second sense. They might create gardening subcultures, though. So, creators and fanatics are both geeks. They totally love the new thing. They're fascinated by all its esoteric ins and outs, and they spend all their available time doing it or talking about it. You can find this dynamic, let's say, in Jonathan Peugeot's little space on Facebook, or the Bridges of Meaning Discord server, or how many different Jordan Peterson groups on Facebook, or places in Reddit where people do their thing, or the awakening from the meaning crisis about all the 4Ps of knowledge. And, we want to substitute perspectival for parabolic. And someone says, forget the P's, just relational. No, geeks care about the P's. If the scene is sufficiently geeky, it remains a geeky thing, a weird hobby, but not a subculture. Now, lurking beneath this is the question of the relationship between appearances, let's say, between the fact that a group of people get really excited about something and whether or not what they're getting excited about is real. So this is sort of where Jordan Peterson stuff comes in because, well, I don't know, Harry Potter is real enough to get a whole generation really excited about it. Star Wars is real enough to get a whole generation dressing up like Luke and Princess Leia and going to the theater in costume. Rocky Horror Picture Show, of course, got there first. So there's a lot going on here, but this sort of article is sort of really smart sociology that doesn't wait around for the statisticians, okay? But pretty much trades on impressions, and I think quite cogently. Anyway, let's continue. If the scene is unusually exciting, let's say like Jordan Peterson, and the new thing can be appreciated without having to get utterly geeky about details, how many hours of video do you really need to watch? It draws MOPs. Well, what are MOPs? Well, let's look at the little footnote before we go into the rest of it. MOPs is an abbreviation for members of the public. It seems to be fairly common in Britain. My American misuse of it here is probably somewhat non-standard. Other terms could be used like casuals or tourists. MOPs are fans, but not rabid fans like fanatics, okay? So they haven't really done the deep dive into Jordan Peterson. Maybe they read 12 Rules for Life and they're a little tired of their high school son getting bullied by left-wing tyrants, but they're out there, but they're not the real hardcore. They're not the geeks, okay? They don't get endlessly fascinated by all of this minutia. And again, I refer to a video about, it was College Humor. It was about how Christians are really Bible geeks, just like Star Wars fans are really George Lucas geeks, okay? Maybe if I remember, I'll drop that link in the comments or in the notes below. MOPs are fans, members of the public, are fans, but not rabid like fanatics. They show up to have a good time and contribute as little as they reasonably can in exchange, okay? So they're not the hardcore folks. They're not on the Discord server 16 hours a day. Geeks welcome MOPs, at first at least. It's the mass of MOPs who turn a scene into a subculture. And now we're getting definitions. Creation is always at least partly an act of generosity. Creators want as many people to use and enjoy their creations as possible. That's true. It's also good for the ego. It confirms that the new thing really is exciting and hopefully real, and not just a geek obsession. Further, some money can usually be extracted from MOPs, just enough at this stage that some creators can quit their day jobs and go pro. See, I'm not quite successful enough a creator, and we'll probably get into that a little bit later in this piece. Fanatics contribute much more per head than MOPs, but they are few enough that it's rarely possible for creatives to go full-time with support only from fanatics. Full-time creators produce more and better of the new thing. Okay. Now, again, when I think about this, I also think about churches, because a lot of this dynamic is very much within churches. You talk to pastors, they'll talk about the 80-20 rule. And so it's usually 20% geeks and 80% MOPs, because the 20% do most of the volunteering, the 20% do most of the giving, the 20% are really what make the church go, and it's the 80%, no, they'll come on Sunday and they might go to a small group and they're in and out, but they're very much members of the public, and it's the 20% that really make the church go, and any pastor doing this knows this. All right. Now the MOP invasion. And I think, thinking about it this way, churches have actually, in some ways, managed these dynamics in a better than average way. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm watching all of the excitement going on around Jordan Peterson, why, well, all of these pastor skills that I have sort of make sense in this culture. Fanatics want to share their obsession, and MOPs initially validate it for them. However, as MOP numbers grow, they become a headache. Fanatics do all the organizational work, initially just on behalf of the geeks, out of generosity and to enjoy a geek sub-society. They put on events, build websites, take up publicity flyers, and deal with accountants. That's exactly what happens in church. You have your board members or your officers, and they're all the geeks. They're the people that are really invested. And part of what happens in church is that over time we have some fairly reliable ways of turning MOPs into geeks. And that's what pastors do. We turn MOPs into geeks. MOPs just passively soak up the good stuff. You may even have to push them around the floor. They have to be led to the drink. At best, you can charge them admission or a subscription fee, but they'll inevitably argue that it was wrong because capitalism is evil and also because they forgot their wallet. And again, there's a lot of this stuff in church culture. MOPs dilute the culture. The new thing, although attractive, is more intense and weird and complicated than MOPs would prefer. Their favorite songs are the ones that are least the new thing and more like other popular things. Some creators oblige with less radical, friendlier, simpler creations. And again, if you look at church music, they're describing it pretty much to a T here. And, church music becomes the thing in church. The church is Christianity is a big enough platform that you have these dynamics nesting on each other. MOPs relate to each other in normal ways, like people do on TV, which the fanatics find repellent. During intermission, geeks want to talk about the new thing, but MOPs blather about sports, ball, and celebrities, and you can see this at meetups too. The MOPs also seem increasingly entitled, treating the fanatics as service workers. And again, in church, you see this all the time. Some of the geeks get really tired about always being on council, and why don't the others pull their fair share, and why is it always us who are doing everything? Well, you're the geeks and they're the MOPs, and that's kind of how it goes. Now enter the sociopath. Unless sociopaths show up, I'm using sociopath here in Rao's informal sense, not technical clinical one. A subculture at this stage is ripe for exploitation. The creators generate cultural capital, in other words, cool. The fanatics generate social capital, a network of relationships, strong ones among geeks and weaker but numerous ones among MOPs. The MOPs, when properly squeezed, produce liquid capital, i.e. money. None of these groups have any clue about how to extract and manipulate any of these forms of capital. The sociopaths, however, quickly become best friends with selected creators. They dress just like the creators, only better. They talk just like the creators, only smoother. They may even do some creating competently, if not creatively. Geeks may not be completely fooled, but they are also clueless about what the sociopaths are up to. The MOPs are fooled. They don't care so much about the details, and the sociopaths look to them like creators, only better. Sociopaths become the coolest kids in the room, demoting the creators. At this stage, they take the pick of the best-looking MOPs to sleep with. They've extracted the cultural capital. The sociopaths also work out how to monetize MOPs, which the fanatics were never good at. At better publicity materials, the addition of a light show and new, more crowd-friendly product, admissions fees go up tenfold and MOPs are willing to pay. And again, you see this in church culture all the time. And the sociopaths are sometimes the celebrity pastors. They're the megachurch pastors. They're the people who have figured out the shtick, and they have the right kind of music and the right kind of message, and they have honed all of the thing in, and they are going to They are going to do it, and everyone else is going to look at it and say, wow. But the fanatics are going to look at it and say, not so fast. They've boiled down the truthful essence of what my particular theological community was about. However, more of them do get enough to go full-time, which means there's more products to sell. The sociopaths also hire some fanatics as actual service workers. They resent it, but at least they too get to work full-time on the new thing, which they still love, even in the light version. The rest of the fanatics get pushed out or leave in disgust, brokenhearted. The death of cool, unless. After a couple of years, the cool is all used up, partly because the new thing is now no longer new, map territory, unmapped territory, and partly because it was diluted into the new light, L-I-T-E, which is inherently uncool. As the MOPs dwindle, the sociopaths loot whatever value is left and move on to the next exploit. They leave behind only wreckage, devastated geeks who still have no idea what happened to their wonderful new thing and the wonderful friendships they formed around it. Often the geeks all end up hating each other, due first to the stress of supporting MOPs, and later due to the sociopath divide and conquer manipulation tactics. And this is so true in churches. This is so true in religious movements. You see it all the time. If you look in the deconstruction realms, it's not so much the MOPs who deconstruct, it's the fanatics. It's the geeks who deconstruct, because they were the true believers and they really believed, and some church or some pastor or some movement or some new thing broke their heart. And so now they're just angry, and they're going to have their revenge by going out there and denouncing the old new thing, because now they have a new thing, and it's off to the races once again. Unless some of the creators are geniuses, if they can give the new thing genuine mass appeal, they can ascend into superstardom. Jesus Christ Superstar? The subculture will reorganize around them into a much more durable form. I won't go into all that here. I point out that this almost never happens without sociopaths. And maybe Jacob in the Discord server will say the Apostle Paul of Tarsus was a sociopath. I don't think so. It doesn't really fit the profile, but anyway. An ambitious creator may know they have mass appeal genius and could be a star, but very rarely do they know how to get from here to there. Jesus certainly did seem to know how to get, again, what was Jesus' game? Because crucifixion isn't really, it's a path to superstardom, but if you're a materialist, it's sort of a dead-end road. Okay, you may be remembered like Achilles, but who cares when you're down in in Hades, swapping stories with Odysseus? So, again, your mileage may vary, but some of these patterns and some of these dynamics, definitely true, definitely easily seen within churches and religious movements and new Christian things that hit that basically go viral. Resistance. So what is to be done? Now, at this point, to me, it gets interesting, because what is to be done? Well, what do you want to have happen? Well, I wanted my new thing to what? I wanted to put time in a bottle. I wanted to make love stay. I wanted to somehow live in the new thing forever and ever and have it keep giving me that cool, that mojo, that juice, that quan, that it gave me it seems like the first time. I mean, I can do this with all kinds of pop songs from my youth, because that's what they're all talking about, isn't it? I want to see the great vision realized, instantiated, grow matter, colonize the world, and those darn sociopaths destroyed it. And so what you do is you sort of huddle up and you create something a little bit harder, something a little bit more durable, something that can endure time. And, you can still find remnants of the a religious movement, the Great Awakening and the revival and all of these things, they're still around because, well, they've figured out how to institutionalize, how to keep the vision alive, how to somehow hold up and hold out until their day will come and the whole world will recognize that finally the Dutch Reformed were right and everyone else was wrong. And so just wait and scan newspapers, and when Ross Douthat looks at West Michigan or Northwest Iowa and says, there's something different about them, and everyone in the CRC says, yes. So what is to be done? This is a geek question. The subculture lifestyle is a problem only from a geek perspective. Why? Because the MOPs are sort of tourists. They're sort of just from on one thing to the next. They're not true believers. As far as MOPs are concerned, it provides a reliable, low-cost waves of novelty entertainment and casual social relationships. As far as sociopaths are concerned, it generates easy exploited pools of prestige, sex, power, and money. From a utilitarian point of view, MOPs hugely outnumber geeks. And even in churches, that's 20% and 80%. So in terms of the total social value, it's all good. Can't make omelets without breaking some eggheads. So what is to be done? Geeks can refuse to admit MOPs. In fact, successful subcultures always do create costly barriers to entry to keep out the uncommitted. Oh, and you see this in church all the time. I'll discuss these barriers more extensively in upcoming writing. Good, and I could give you 1,000 examples from the church world. In the heyday of subcultures, those were called posers. Poser was always directed even more at sociopaths than MOPs, right, because they're the posers of the creators, but didn't clearly distinguish between the two. MOP exclusion keeps the subculture comfortable for geeks, but severely limits its potential. Often there's a struggle between geeks who like their cozy little club as it is and geeks who want a shot at greatness for themselves or the group or the new thing. In any case, subculture boundaries are always porous, and if the new thing is cool enough, MOPs will get in regardless. It's true. The optimal MOP-geek ratio is maybe 6-1. I would say it's 8-2. That would be 4-1. But it could also be that in the small church context that I'm in, for example, in a small church like mine, the fanatics are way more than 20% in some ways in terms of people who are committed, and there's not that many MOPs. They're still both, and the MOPs still outnumber the fanatics. But you see, these things also scale. Because, just a few people keep a church like this alive financially, and a few more have to do some things to keep it going in terms of other levels. At that ratio, the MOPs provide more energy than they consume. At a ratio above 10-1 becomes unworkable. It's a recipe for burnout among supporting fanatics. Ideally, the ratio could be controlled. I've actually got a lot of thoughts about this, especially in terms of how church money works. But he's not talking churches. See, church dynamics are a little bit different in some of these things. I think few subcultures understand the imperative, and I'm not sure how it could be done, even if one did understand. MOPs move in herds. Usually either there are only a few or their numbers grow quickly too large. And again, I've told the story before. Church I went to when I was in college in Grand Rapids, when I started going to the church, they had 250 in attendance on a Sunday. In the evening service, maybe even less than 100. And then within a few years, they had, pushing 1,000. And I'll tell you, the people least happy with that growth, a lot of the fanatics that were there at the beginning. And some of the MOPs who were there at the beginning too. Sociopaths only show up if there's enough MOPs to exploit. Or if the sociopaths' ambitions are small enough that they're poor enough or small enough that they figure out that they can at least do some feeding on this small group. And so, I've seen my share of sociopaths show up at Livingstone's wanting to somehow do something, and I just laugh. Because, hey, buddy, there's not that much room on the bone here, and too many people have an idea about what you're doing. So, you'll pretty quickly move on. Sociopaths only show up if there's enough MOPs to exploit, so excluding or limiting MOPs is a strategy for excluding sociopaths. Some cultures do understand this and succeed in it. Alternatively, you could recognize sociopaths and eject them. Geeks may be pretty good at recognizing, but are lousy at ejecting. That's true. MOPs don't recognize sociopaths and anyway don't care. Because, again, they just want more of even the new thing light. And so a popularizer, well, that's just fine. MOPs have little investment in the subculture and can just walk away when the sociopath ruins it. By the time sociopaths show up, MOPs are numerically most of the subculture. Sociopaths manipulate the MOPs, and it's hard for the geeks to overrule an overwhelming majority. Again, you see this all the time in churches. Anyway, horribly, geeks need sociopaths. If the new thing is ever going to be more than a geeky hobby or a brief fad that collapses under the weight of the MOP invasion. Again, what are the geeks looking for? Why can't we make love stay? Why can't we put time in a bottle? Why can't we get these things to live forever? Why won't my new thing, why won't the love that I have finally conquer the world as the waters cover the sea? So what is to be done? Is to be done for what? A geek wrote this. And, well, Be Slightly Evil, and I shared this with a friend, and he said, that title probably isn't going to go too far, but he recognized the dynamics too. Be slightly evil, be slightly mercenary. You can see the deep way in which Christian value has, in fact, permeated everything, which, of course, drove Nietzsche really quite mad. The subcultural mode mostly ended around 2000. There still are subcultures, new ones all the time, but they no longer have the cultural and social force they used to have. And again, you'd have to look at more of his documents to see what he's talking about. The classical model of subculture no longer works for the reasons given here. Plus others I describe in upcoming writing don't think it can be rescued. And I would argue that actually subcultures continue to go on in churches all the time. And it could very well be that this person, like many people, is mostly living on the internet. And so you're watching internet things open and close, open and close, open and close, sort of like Jonah's plant. And if you don't know Jonah's plant, you'll have to read the book of Jonah. It's in the Bible, in case you've never been to Sunday school. But things on the internet are opening, closing, opening, closing, opening, closing. Church stuff is much more durable. It's much more in real life. And this, in this way, cyber is powerful, but it's, as long as it stays cyber, it always sort of stays in a certain realm and can open and close very quickly. However, the fluid mode, my hope for the future, and this sort of permeates a lot of his other ideas on this website. It's a very interesting website. Resembles the subculture mode in many ways. The same social dynamics may play out unless there's a powerful antidote. A slogan from Rao's may point the way, be slightly evil. Or geeks need to learn and use some of the sociopath's tricks. The corruption of the geeks. Here's the thing. But to be a geek is to be a true believer. Once you allow that in, because, this whole dynamic is going up in your consciousness Congress too. Then geeks can capture more of the value they create and get better at ejecting true sociopaths. Specific strategies for sociopathy are outside the scope of this book. However, I have an abstract suggestion. Rao concludes his analysis by explaining that his sociopaths are actually nihilists. And, okay, what do you mean by that? Well, they're in it for the take. They're rent seekers. You're going to live for today and die tomorrow and eat, drink, and be merry. That's the way it's going to go. In much of the same sense, I use the word. Serious subcultures are usually eternalistic, and this gets very interesting because anybody who watches my video will say, yeah, eternalistic. Why are church subcultures so durable? They're very eternalistic. What do you mean by eternalistic? Well, they believe in eternality, let's say, and they're not nihilists. So we get a little spectrum here. We've got the eternalists and the nihilists. The eternalists believe in the genuine article. They're the truest of true believers. They believe that their vision, well, maybe they have their vision right here and right now, and maybe all forms of love will be ended by betrayal or death, but the eternalists are Platonists. They believe that the thing itself is what's giving us reality down here somehow. Eternalists' naivete, make subcultures much easier to exploit. Slightly evil defense of a subculture requires realism. Letting go of eternalist hope and faith in imaginary guarantees that the new thing will triumph. This is so much fun. Such realism is characteristic of nihilism. Boy, there's a lot in that paragraph. Nihilism has its own delusions, though. It is worth trying to create beautiful, useful new things, and worth defending them against nihilism. A full realistic worldview corrects both eternalistic and nihilistic errors. And of course, at this point, the thing beneath the writer is now coming up to the top. Combining what works in eternalism and nihilism amounts to the complete stance. And again, he's got lots of definitions for this, which is essentially the same thing as fluid mode. And so, yeah, I think it's a great piece. And if you start clicking on these links, this person, the new thing for him is his fluid mode. And he's got, it sort of reminds me a little bit of, what am I thinking about? Sort of reminds me a little bit about integral theory, but instead of integral theory where you have all of, the green and, all of this ramps up until now, well, now we have fluid mode, and he's got a really cool chart. Let's see if I can, okay, this table. See how well this shows up. It shows up pretty well. And he's got all these, he's got choiceless, successful systems in crisis, countercultures, subcultures, atomization, fluidity. And you can see where, this is sort of like the spiral dynamics and sort of like integral theory and similar to the whole thing. So, but I really liked, similar to how I liked the mooks and knights, I really enjoyed how his story of MOPs and Sociopaths and Geeks, that really is a pattern. It really does play out. And of course, he's got questions about his fluidity and eternalists and nihilists. But there's a lot in here. There's a lot of good thinking. So I'm probably going to do a little bit more research, click on a few more links. But I wanted to share some of this with you today. Enjoy.